Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the UANA Conference. It's with great pleasure that I bring this next topic to you because it's one that's very important to all of our aquatic disciplines and all of our countries. It's also one that's very near and dear to my heart as well. So my name is Margot Mountjoy. I'm from Canada, and I'm a sport medicine physician, a member of the UANA Executive, and a member of the FINA Bureau. I am moderating this session today, which is called Beyond Treading Water, Mental Health for Athletes. I have the pleasure today of introducing to you one of my colleagues, one of my friends, and one of swimming's team physicians that is a sports psychiatrist, Dr. Carla Edwards. Dr. Carla Edwards is a sports psychiatrist who works with several national sport organizations in Canada and their athletes. She's currently the High Performance Mental Health Advisor for Cycling Canada as well as Swimming Canada. And she also consults with many others on mental illness and psychological struggles of athletes. She has authored several book chapters about sports in the COVID-19 era, about psychiatric emergencies in athletes and depression in athletes as well. Her expertise and experience provides insight into common mental illnesses in the athlete population. I'm looking very forward to Dr. Edwards' talk today, and I'm sure that all of us will gain some very practical experience that we can take home, share with our coaches, share with our sport organization to improve the mental health of our athletes. I would now like to turn it over to Dr. Edwards to begin her talk.
Thank you, Dr. Mountjoy, and thank you for UANA for the invitation to come and speak today. I think this virtual convention is a fantastic way to promote unification, and if the pandemic has done one thing for us, it's really given us an opportunity to eliminate geographic boundaries and challenges of travel to still get together to talk about important things like this. So I'm really happy to be talking to you about this today. I think it's a very important topic. I spend most of my life as an athlete at various levels, and I feel very privileged to be able to now work with athletes and try to help them with their mental health. So as we go through today, I hope you'll be able to walk away from this with an idea about just sports in general and what joy it can bring to us, but also what burden it can bring to us and how we can still emerge from that with good mental health. I plan to navigate through this talk just at the beginning, bringing you through, again, how sports enrich our lives from the beginning. I think sometimes sport can be like a freeway or a highway where we get on it and it just goes really fast without the opportunity to pay attention to the good things along the way. So I'm going to try to bring that to the forefront and remind you about some of those things today, as well as to look at the importance of sports with the developing athlete and how we can keep athletes engaged and healthy throughout their entire careers and lives with sport. We're going to talk specifically about when athletes struggle, because they do. It isn't always podiums and it isn't always glamour. Sometimes it's real struggles. So bring some of those to the forefront, discuss some of the most common mental illnesses that athletes can experience. And then I hope to help you understand how to see it, either in yourselves, in your teammates, in the athletes that you're coaching, or even within your family members, and then what to do with that. And then wrapping it up at the end with just some messages about how to be healthy and stay healthy, and that will translate into great performance. But we have to be healthy first. Let's talk a little bit about sports and life first. I work with athletes from all different levels, and the athletes who I treat who have an opportunity to travel the world for their sport, I often ask them, what about the places you've gone? Do you get a chance to just sit and look at the mountains before you cycle that road? Or do you get to sit and look at the ocean before you go to the pool for your training session that day? What about the amazing architecture in the various European cities that you get an opportunity to compete in? Do you have a chance to soak that in? And oftentimes the answer is no. They're there for their competition and then they're out. And I think that's a lot of missed opportunities, because some of our athletes and coaches and staff have such an amazing opportunity to see the world And it would be so fantastic if they have an opportunity to really appreciate that along the way so that they can remember and reflect later about what a great experience it was. Sport brings a lot of things to our lives. It brings the opportunity to develop socially within our teams, creating friendships, meeting mentors, aiming for role models. It helps us become more physically literate to understand how to move our bodies in a safe way, how to become strong, how to become better coordinated. From an emotional point of view, anybody who's ever been involved with sports understands it can sometimes be quite difficult to manage in terms of anger or disappointment or sadness or just too much excitement. Well, being better at sports can also help you understand how to contain some of that emotion and channel it in a very positive way, or just manage it in a way that's not destructive. From a financial point of view, sport can also create opportunities. National team athletes can sometimes receive funding to support their training and their travel. As they improve and move along their careers, some become semi-professionals or professionals and get sponsorship, so it can be quite financially lucrative. As I mentioned earlier, sports provide an opportunity to travel the world or even travel more locally, give you opportunities to see places you wouldn't otherwise see. And educational opportunities. Many sport programs provide opportunities to help you go through educational pathways, either during or after your careers. And then sort of the pinnacle of a lot of people's success is that international competition event, the major games that so many shoot for. Again, on that pathway to sport, it can often lead there. But if you don't begin, it's really hard to get there. Sports also support development. What I mean by that is most countries develop their sport programs along the lines of athlete and personal development. We wouldn't expect a 5 or 6-year-old to have the same training regimen as a university student or a national team athlete. Sports need to make sense, and they need to make sense in what the young person is ready for from a physical point of view and a cognitive or mental point of view. They have to understand why they're doing what they're doing, or they just need to be out there having fun. So all of the developmental pathways for sport need to go along with what the athlete is ready for at that time. Long-term athlete development programs, which are prominent certainly in North America, certainly plan out those pathways and create milestones for athletes to meet along the way before they would reach the next level. The major things that they aim for are elements like mental skills. What are they capable of understanding about the game? Life skills. What can they do to manage interpersonal relationships and losses and wins? And then when they get older, learning to understand the game, technical and strategic competencies, and physical capacity when they're able to lift weights or develop more endurance. Swimming Canada has developed an appropriate athlete development pathway as well as an athlete development matrix, again, to build on the scaffolding of long-term athlete development to ensure that athletes are going to be able to engage in the sport in a safe way, but also keep them involved. And we know that when athletes leave their sport, oftentimes it's because they don't understand their role, or they're not having fun, or they're no longer given opportunities to participate. By having pathways like this, it'll ensure their ability to stay engaged in the games and develop as a person and an athlete in parallel. What do we do when they struggle? Well, all athletes face adversity at some point, and adversity just means challenges or things that really make them work hard and can really make them struggle sometimes. This can happen in training, it can happen in competition, but also we know it happens in life all the time. How they manage adversity will determine how much it impacts or throws off their lives. Most manage adversity quite well and don't develop mental illness. And in fact, I would argue that the adversity that you can experience in sport, again, as you go along that athlete development pathway, helps you understand how to manage that. And you can develop a skill set to learn how to manage those stresses and struggles, how to find your supports and rise above it. But if an athlete has mental illness at the baseline, the foundation, it can erode their resilience or their ability to bounce back or deal with adversity. And this can then potentially lead to significant impact on their function and sport performance. So having a history of mental illness or having the potential for mental illness can impact their ability to cope with adversity, which can then have an impact on their performance. Athletes are vulnerable to develop the exact same mental illnesses as the rest of the population. Being an athlete, being an excellent athlete, does not give you immunity to bipolar disorder, depression, or anxiety, or anything else. Any athlete from any sport could struggle with their mental health at any time in their lives. Some illnesses, like ADHD, may present in higher percentages in certain positions in specific sports. And I'll give you an example. If you think about American football, the linebackers, defensive backs in American football, many of them have ADHD. Many of them like the impact that ADHD has on their ability to engage in their sport and execute their position. They have to be aggressive. They have to be spontaneous and impulsive and explosive. So it works well for them. It wouldn't work well for all positions if it's untreated. I want you to remember this. Mental illness can precede an athlete's involvement in sport, or they can have it before they become active in sport. It can develop as a result of sport. If there are too many stressors, struggles, and it overwhelms their ability to cope, it can create mental illness. Or it can directly influence performance. So if an athlete is really struggling with their emotions or their ability to think clearly, it will translate into challenges in their performance. However, that doesn't mean that they can't be successful. Anybody with any sort of mental illness can still be successful in any part of life. This is an example of one of our amazing athletes in Canada, Emily Overholt, and this is not confidential information. She's been quite open with some of the struggles that she has had. She is one of our Olympic medalists. She's a world champion, and she became very open in the last 2 to 3 years since the Rio Olympics about some of the struggles that she had. And she described it as a huge sense of relief in being able to open up about it. As we know, mental illness can be quite stigmatized, and a lot of athletes feel that they need to hide it, and it's very shameful, or they can face negative repercussions as a result of mental illness. When they finally have the opportunity to feel safe enough to open up about it, it can be quite liberating. And Emily, in fact, has been a leader in this in Canada and has received a number of commendations and awards for her struggles and her ability to be open and supportive about it. Of course, we all know who Michael Phelps is, and his documentary, The Weight of Gold, was released last year on HBO. Within that film, it featured a number of Olympic athletes, and if any of you had an opportunity to see it, you would have heard their stories. These are people that we saw doing amazing performances on the world stage, but behind the scenes knowing that their struggles were internalized or secret. And it went on for so many years, and they felt so very unsupported, but nonetheless were still able to perform. These people are human beings, and we have to recognize that they can also struggle. Monique Horn-Miller is a very strong force in Canadian athletic culture. These are true pictures from her life, and she spoke to us last year at our Olympic lab that we were attending in order to get ready for the Tokyo 2020 Games. Monique told us her story about her life as an Indigenous person in Canada whose community was engaged in conflict in 1990. She was a 14-year-old. And this picture on the left shows the moment after she was impaled by a soldier's bayonet during the conflict. And she came within a centimeter of actually dying. But she survived, obviously. And she always had a dream of becoming an Olympic athlete and was always told that doesn't happen for people like us. And she did not use that as something that would stop her. She used it as something that would propel her to go forward. And she became the first Canadian Mohawk woman to compete at the Olympics. And she had quite a successful career. And now she's a strong ambassador and very, very inspirational. And I appreciate that she has shared her story with us. This slide has a lot of words. And I've put them up there in one way to show you that these illnesses, there's many of them, can be experienced by any athlete at any time, as I said before. Common ones like depression, adjustment disorder, if they have difficulty post-injury, bipolar disorder, anxiety is very common. All of these on the list can be experienced at any time. There are, of course, life stressors, trauma inside and outside of sport, behavior problems, I put an asterisk by the behavior problems part because behavior problems are a symptom of a bigger challenge. But very often, those are the things that cause the athlete to run into difficulty, because those will manifest as being late for practice, or not finishing the sets that you're given, or being angry or irritable or reactive to your teammate or your coach. And often it causes bigger problems. And usually that's what precedes their referral to somebody like me. But then it's about taking the story apart and understanding what's behind that. So behavior problems don't mean that the person is a bad person or a difficult or uncoachable person. It means that there's probably something else going on, and we need to do some more exploring about that. Some sports are more prone to things like catastrophic injuries and death or sport. Certainly in the cycling world, they've been really heavily involved with that over the last 2 to 3 years. Substance abuse can happen in any sport. Some research indicates that it's more common in some than others. Eating disorders, again, more common in some sports than others. And Dr. Mountjoy is a leading expert on REDS. So I'm really glad that she's able to be here today, because that can certainly manifest as mental health challenges in athletes as well. The others are clear. The post-games crash I really want to highlight today as well, because we presumably will have a games this summer, and certainly another games next winter. And it's quite common for athletes to experience significant changes in their mood afterwards. Michael Phelps spoke about this extensively in his Weight of Gold documentary. So there's some, evidence to show that we need to increase the amount of supports that we provide to our athletes in the post-games period of time. There's some other challenges certainly that athletes encounter, including sexual orientation in sport, feeling safe in that environment, gender identity, and androgenization. Certainly that's been a big topic in the athletics world. So many, many challenges I just want to put on your radar so that you're aware. There are also a number of obstacles to getting help. Many elements make athletes reluctant to disclose their struggles and seek help. But a lot of places don't have regular screening, questionnaires even, just to review mood status, eating habits, sleep, the presence of ADHD symptoms or anxiety, and then resources for interpretation and follow-up. We're starting to make gains in introducing them in national team settings, certainly in Canada. I can't speak to other nations. And even the university level, we're trying to expand that and make it a more regular practice, because we know that it's there. We need to now be able to detect it and then have some resources to help manage it. That leads me to the next one, of the lack of qualified mental health personnel within sports organizations. We understand that funding is often limited and choices have to be made about what types of professionals they have within an organization to help support athletes. In Canada, we're trying to develop a variety of different models where in some cases where organizations have more resources, they're able to have specified mental health personnel embedded within their programs, but otherwise have a network available for the rest of the country so that teams or organizations that don't have their own can easily access those other external consultants. I alluded to stigma before. We understand this word. Athletes fear being labeled as weak or defective or unreliable because of mental illness. They are judged. Fear of lost opportunities due to unfair judgment also influences the athlete's openness to seek and receive support for mental illness. This is a true event. This is a real thing that athletes need to be worried about. And I have seen athletes on the professional level be cut from teams because they've seen psychiatrists. So it is something that they do need to worry about. And I think we need to do a better job in creating safe environments for that. Avoidance is a common theme. Elite and high performance athletes are driven by goals, very demanding training programs, travel and competitions. They feel like there's not really a whole lot of time to fit in seeing a counselor or working on issues from their past or things that they fear may disrupt their drive. There's a misconception that working on challenges or issues actually make you feel worse. And sometimes it does, but in fact, it could help you be better at what you do. It can help you be stronger, be more resilient, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But it is very common for them to kind of shove it aside until it comes to a point where they can't. Fear of sports-based repercussions or bias, particularly if there's a lack of return to play pathway for training that's interrupted by mental illness, is often another reason why they don't seek help. Return to play post-mental illness or because of depression or a recent suicide attempt or bipolar disorder, it's a real challenge. We don't have the clear protocols like a return from a torn ACL or repaired shoulder with designated timelines and milestones that we need to check off. With mental health return to play, oftentimes it's very individualized. It can be guided by certain principles, but time needs to be made and the right professionals need to be involved in determining that return to play. And if that pathway isn't present, the athletes likely won't take a chance of being removed from the training center or prohibited from competing if it's known that they're struggling. From an image point of view, intentional or not, high performance athletes or high profile athletes have an image in society that is created by their appearance, by their performance, social behavior, lifestyle, and accomplishments. They may perceive that acknowledging the presence of mental illness would tarnish that image or result in them losing social commodity. And again, that risk is real. In some circles, that would happen, I guess, depending on what the nature of their disclosures were. But they do worry about that. And again, that's just one extra thing that may get in the way of them seeking help. So how do we look for it then? If someone is going to be reluctant to bring it forward themselves, or maybe don't recognize it in themselves, what are the common signs? Well, we can see changes in behavior. People may be more isolative. They may not want to talk to you as much. Isolation is very common these days, of course, in the pandemic. So it's hard for them to actually go with people, certainly in Canada anyway. Avoidance, irritability, pretty much changes from any sort of baseline behavior is something to pay attention to. Changes in training patterns, more absences, or being late or leaving early. Any change from baseline is something to pay attention to. A change in performance. Performance can be influenced by many, many things, including nutrition, amount of sleep, just periodization, age, changing body. Menstrual cycle can also affect that as well. But again, if you're looking at significant change relative to baseline, it's something to put on your radar. And if you see it in concert with other things, that may mean a deeper issue that needs to be addressed. Reduced attendance, again, something to pay attention to and ask about. Changes in eating patterns, rapid weight loss or weight gain, that's unexpected. And changes in sleep. Either too much or too little, it can go either way. A person may start to have increased substance use, lots of different substances, whether it's drinking, marijuana, other types of drugs. Or there may be signs of self-harm, sometimes in the form of cut marks in various parts of their bodies. And athletes of different types, depending on what their uniforms look like or their equipment looks like, will find very creative ways to hide it. So oftentimes signs of self-harm may be picked up more easily by massage therapists or physiotherapists or athletic trainers who are kind of looking at their various body parts without them really being aware of it, and it may be able to be detected that way. That emotional reactivity and panic attacks. Again, we're looking at a difference from baseline. So if a person all the time is very reactive and more prone to anxiety attacks, then that's sort of part of who they are, and their baseline still needs help probably, but maybe nothing out of the ordinary. But if it's somebody who's typically pretty even-keeled, and now they're kind of either barking at you or more irritable and angry or just not able to contain their anxiety, again, something that may indicate that there's something going on. It's very helpful for an organization to establish a pathway of support for their mental athletes, for the mental health in their athletes. Again, if we know what to do with what we see, it's much easier to manage. If you see something and you don't know what to do with it, it's much, much harder. So this is really about just encouraging organizations, if you haven't already set something up, to think about how that might look within your means, within your resources, within your personnel. This would create a clear and comprehensive and accessible plan that can be used by anybody. So if it's a referral pathway, if it's a way to reach out to and engage networks of consultants in the community or people within your organization, as long as everybody knows how to follow that pathway, it can become seamless. This can guide support as well as interventions, training adjustments, return to play plans, urgency ratings, knowing when to react and how much, and the identified personnel to provide support. Roles and goals, I often refer to this as. It's a very easy way to collaborate within the team, to have the athlete involved in their wellness plan, and to understand who's doing what and when. Normalizing and facilitating the conversations about mental health for athletes and staff will reduce the stigma and encourage them to seek help. I think that's what's really helped some of our swimmers in Canada, is that they've recognized that we have this big support pathway right now, and it is fully encouraged for them to be as expressive or not, but the support is there for them. You know, it's a safe place. So then what can you specifically do about it for those athletes on the call today? I want you to understand that if you struggle, it does not mean that you're weak or defective. It means you're normal. Everybody struggles. You're a human being. It is okay to struggle. You cannot be a machine. You cannot perform at 100% all the time. It's just not realistic. But if you struggle, you need to know, is it within normal limits or is it beyond what I can handle? The earlier you get the help, the better. We know that staying unwell for too long can actually change your brain cells and cause a bit of brain damage in different ways. People who stay depressed longest without intervention, it takes much longer to get better. Similarly with anxiety. If you have anxiety and it creates some unhealthy patterns of trying to deal with it, then those patterns are really hard to change. So the earlier you can get the help, the better. And you can only perform well if you are healthy inside and out, top to bottom. And I'm referring to your brain now. We know that everybody really focuses on the body and how much time you're in the pool and strength and conditioning. You need to work as hard on your mental state to make sure that you're healthy. The basic building blocks are the easiest things to put aside, but also the easiest things to put back when you're struggling. Make sure you're getting enough sleep, make sure you're eating enough, take care of yourself, get those showers, put on your comfy cozies sometimes, do some things that you enjoy, and have some balance in your life where you're not just sleeping, eating, training. There has to be some other things that are going to create balance and satisfaction. Be very careful of social media. I worked with Haley Wickenheiser, who's one of our best Canadian Olympians in history with softball and hockey. She gave advice to one of my athletes saying, you're never as good as they say, and you're never as bad as they say on social media. So it's better to ignore it if you can, but certainly not look at it around competition time. Just be very careful not to be sucked into it. Also seek assistance through your coach or manager or team staff, doctor, teammate. Identify your safe people. You don't have to disclose everything to everybody, but identify your safe people that you feel comfortable with and try to create that avenue that you can reach out to a little bit more often. Coaches. Recognize that a healthy athlete, again, mentally and physically, is a strong and fast athlete. An unhealthy athlete, you got it, is slow and not strong. I don't like the weak word. Support your athlete if they seek help for their struggles. I know some coaches who make fun of them, who belittle them, and shame them when they struggle. And so that drives them into hiding. That's going to make them not want to talk to you, and it's going to make them really push through times when they shouldn't. If they come and talk to you, recognize that it's taken a lot for them to do that. Welcome that. If you don't know what to do with it, find someone who can, all right? But here's what I would encourage you to do. Gently explore your concerns with that athlete if there are signs. If you pick up on any of the signs that I talked about a minute ago, they may not be ready to seek help or accept help yet, but even if you plant the seed that help might be good for them, that if they get help early, they may get healthy faster and then get back on track and be able to perform. Sometimes those seeds will percolate and then they'll come around a little bit faster. Be open with your question about, is there anything you can do to help them or anything that they need or anything that would be helpful? Again, you may not know what to do, but the athlete may have an idea of what would be helpful. So having that collaboration and partnership would be great. If you know of linkages, if you know of supports in the community, you can suggest and facilitate them. And even again, if you don't, Maybe putting them to somebody who does know would be helpful. If you're concerned about their behavior or their ability to be safe, ensure that you explore that with them. Don't be afraid of that question. Have you thought about not living anymore or ending your life? Don't be afraid of that question. Some people are, and they don't want to ask it. You don't want to miss it. If they are having those thoughts, you can either call 911 or whatever the local number is in your country, or try to find some crisis services for them. If the answer is no, then you can explore what other types of supports can be put in place. They may have a family doctor, or they may already have a counselor, something like that. Facilitate appointments if necessary and appropriate. What I mean by that is, if they have an appointment with their counselor and it conflicts with training, if it's possible to be flexible in their training, try to help them with that. Try to put them in a situation where they don't have to choose between their mental health and being at practice. Arrange to meet with them again for follow-up. So try not to make it a one and done. Again, you may feel uncomfortable with this conversation. Recognize that they do as well. And if they come to you for help and support, it's because they look at you as being a person that they believe can help them. So please invite them back to check in. This can be a journey that you go on together with them. And then involving the parents as appropriate. So that would depend on the age of the athlete, of course, and the state of crisis. If they're in crisis, you would need to involve them for sure. And if they're a minor, you would for sure. Parents, if there are any parents on the call, or if any of you coaches are parents, if your child wants to talk to you, please give them the time. The opportunity may not present itself again. Again, this can apply to coaches. So if your athlete comes to you, it means that they've already gone through a lot of mental obstacles to convince themselves that they should. And they've played that conversation over in their head probably a number of times. Even if you're busy, carving out those few minutes can be very profound and powerful. Listen to their words, and even teammates to each other, listen to the words. Don't dismiss or invalidate or explain it away or minimize, laugh at them. Don't judge them. Don't perpetuate the stigma. What I mean by that is, don't tell them to keep it a secret, right? They're telling you because they feel safe doing that. Welcome that, embrace that. Know which hat you're wearing at the time. So if you're a parent who is very involved with their sport career, or if you're the coach and also the parent, that's a tough one. But when they come to you as a parent, make sure you are the parent and you're engaged as the parent and listening, not the coach or the analyst or saying how this will affect their performance, or don't tell the coach because then you won't play. Be with them at that moment and listen. Again, ask them what you can do to help them. That's a very good question. If you don't know what to do, find someone who can help. Talk to a friend, the coach, your doctor, to see how to manage that going forward. Again, the safety issues, don't be afraid to ask that question. It's a very important question. Have they thought about ending their lives or not living anymore? And then reaching out for help as appropriate. Again, support your child attending appointments. I know lots of parents who will not give them rides to appointments, who will not make the phone call to make appointments for them if they're minors. Please take on that role for them and please help them. And again, involve coaches as appropriate. The athlete won't always want the coaches to know, but if you feel that the coach can be helpful in the training environment and can be supportive and maybe can adjust training if the person needs, then that can be a helpful conversation. So let's talk about wellness. We've talked about illness. Let's talk about wellness. There are some very basic skills that I just want to bring to you today that certainly can be expanded upon. So feel free to explore it on your own time. Resilience is a word that I was certain was going to be one of the top 20 words of 2020 because we heard about it all the time. It wasn't coronavirus, vaccine, etc. were in the top 20, but resilience is a super important word. We hear about it a lot in sports. We hear it applied to teams that overcome big deficits and score to come back and win. They're called resilient teams, or athletes who, have thrown an interception and then come back and win. Resilience in this way can be applied that way, but really it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It can be a skill that you have right from birth. It can be developed, and it can always be increased, no matter who in your life. If you know somebody who has incredible coping skills and they just seem to roll with everything, they can still get better with their resilience. Resilience is not something that you either have or you don't have. It's kind of on a continuum, and you see this arrow with many different shades in between. The green side is high resilience. That's the good side. We want to be there where we can handle anything. As we go further down towards the red side, that's where you have lower resilience, where it's very difficult managing challenges and the smallest things can throw you off. And I think over the last year, we've probably fluctuated on that arrow back and forth a few times. And many times being in the, yellow to orange to red zone. Ideally, if we can still bounce back and get to green, that's great. But our capacity for resilience can be affected by many things and can change over time. You can also think of it like a stairwell, up and down the stairwell. Again, the green zone is where you want to be. When you're in the green area, you can focus and maintain yourself, bounce back and adapt and be very functional. You can be confident, you can take it all on, and you can navigate through anything. As things pile on, as things get restricted, life gets restricted, sports change, people are on your back about plans and how things are changing. You can feel a little bit more irritable, a little bit harder to manage, some good, some bad, but you're more easily overwhelmed. You have more conflict with people, and in fact, you communicate a little bit less because it's harder. As you go further down that stairwell with more stress, you can get more negative, and this is where it starts to come out in more behaviors like anger and sadness, poor sleep and poor concentration. Even your body can feel it in the sense of more aches and pains. And then down at the bottom in the red square there, you have very little ability to cope. A lot of people spend a lot of time in bed in this state or at home in the dark. You don't want to talk to anybody. There's a significant change in function, and quality of life, QOL, quality of life is severely affected. You can think of this like a staircase. As I said, you want to keep moving up that staircase so that as the stress levels rise, your resilience levels will rise as well, so that your head is always above the water. If you think about that resilience arrow a couple of slides ago, it's very close to this mental health continuum model, similar. Green is healthy. As you go further along the line, red, here it's called ill, but it's just not doing well. And if you see the table underneath, you can see how the descriptions of how you might feel in each of those stages may come out, and very closely mirrors the resilience arrow. And that, again, mental health is one of those things that can impact your capacity for resilience. How do we build it then? We look at the brain as in the form of hardware, like your computer hardware, where part of it is your physical health. You want to be at a healthy weight, which is different for everybody, healthy blood pressure, blood sugar and cholesterol, some regular exercise, nutrition and sleep. Again, those building blocks are super important, and being able to manage your stress, having some strategies for that and supports, and managing any medical conditions that pop up. That's the hardware that is on the outside that keeps you going. What about on the inside? These are the connections, these are the functions internally that can help impact resilience. One concept is called regulating arousal and the resilient zone of arousal. What that means is if you think about two parallel lines with a line in between that goes up and down, this is the line of how we feel, our emotions and how we function. Sometimes good days, sometimes bad days, but as long as it's within a limit, we're okay. Anything that bumps us outside that limit, we can be either too hot, too cold, too high, too low, that kind of thing. So being able to regulate arousal is really important. Calm thinking, mindfulness, self-compassion, these are all concepts that are big concepts that you can read about. You can learn very specific strategies about how to do that. But all of them have the common theme of helping you stay grounded and regulated and able to cope. Self-compassion is something that I try to talk to a lot of my athletes about, because we know athletes are perfectionists. They're very hard on themselves. They have really high expectations and standards. But learning how to be okay with yourself, give yourself forgiveness if you have an off day, doesn't mean that you're going easy on yourself or letting yourself off the hook, but it can actually give yourself the ability to be stronger, take more chances, and be more successful. Meaning, purpose, balance, and resolve. These are all elements that are very important for success. So meaning is having a meaning. Why are you getting up in the morning? What are you doing? Having a meaning for your day. Attaching value to that is giving purpose to your meaning. So having goals and purpose. Balance, again, is the ability to have more than just 2 or 3 things in your life that you're doing, but you have some meaningful relationships, some leisure time, training, self-care, sleep, good nutrition, all the different elements that we need to be healthy. And resolve is the concept where it's the intensity of commitment that you put into your purpose. So if you attach yourself to a goal and you are able to commit your passion and your desire to that, that's the resolve that you're giving it, and that is likely going to help you get to that next gear to be successful. These things are very important to help you proceed. So I just want to bring it all together. We've talked about a lot of things here. Just reminding you that athletes can experience significant mental illness just like everybody else. Remember, they are human beings that can do superhuman things in their chosen sport, but they're human. Sports can sometimes be protective. We know that exercise is great for mental health, and sports can be protective in the sense that it brings community and support and opportunities. But sometimes all that stress and pressure, performance failure, can be precipitants for illness. We have all faced more adversity this year in the sport world than ever before. Nothing in the history of sport has ever ground all sports to a halt across the globe like coronavirus did. But we're coming back. We're starting to see things coming back. But the stress experience this year has likely affected your coping skills. You've been up and down that continuum, I'm sure, a few times. It's likely affected relationships. It's made it more difficult to connect with people. Work and training, performance and engagement has been challenged. Overall resilience and sense of well-being, I'm certain, has been challenged. Remember that without optimal health, mental and physical health, peak performance will be hard to achieve. You're not going to be fast in the water or strong in the water if you're not healthy. My last point here is seeking help early will protect your brain health, keep you on track, and increase your chances of success. I understand why people feel the need to hide it. I do. I understand that you're doing yourself a disservice if you do. You'll be much healthier if you attack it earlier. But if organizations can help facilitate that by giving the opportunities, creating the infrastructure for that, I think we'll be much more successful in that line. So those are all the things I wanted to talk about today. It's a lot of content. I appreciate that. I'm happy to entertain any questions, and my email address is up here as well if anybody wants to follow up with questions to me directly.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards, for your words of wisdom on what for some people may be a very difficult topic. But I'd like to encourage everyone to not make this a difficult topic. Dr. Edwards has given us all some great strategies that we can use to recognize and to react if we have concerns, and a pathway that we can use to support our athletes. So thank you, Dr. Edwards, for sharing your experiences and your advice to all of us in the aquatic world. We have some wonderful questions in the chat, so I will read some of them out. So the first question from Louise Velasquez. My question is related to the long-term athlete development. Nowadays, we see children at the age of 8, 9, and 10 living as internals. So I think that means living in a high-performance center in Mexico. As a consequence, they are performing dives with very high difficulty degree at very young ages than former divers used to be. Do you think this sporting achievement would have a mental cost or a quality of life cost for these young children in the future?
That's a very good question, and I mean it's. I would certainly never comment on what other countries are doing. I would hope that the programs in some way are addressing the other developmental needs of those 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. I have kids who are 10 and 12, so I know kind of the things that they need from a social point of view, from a leisure point of view, from just being able to be kids. And a lot of the young athletes that I treat some in the same age group. Um, they still need to be able to have fun. And one of the top reasons that athletes leave sport by the age of 15 is when they stop having fun, or there's just too much demand, or there's no separation between sport and life for them. So again, this is very early to be living in a high performance setting. I would wonder how often they see their families, but certainly I would hope there would be a lot of exposure for them to have some balance in their lives as would be expected of other same-aged individuals, so that they don't miss out on those very key areas of development. Otherwise, missing out on those could definitely have a cost as they grow older.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. There's certainly some work been done by the International Olympic Committee on the topic of youth athlete development, and I think it's really important to emphasize your point, Dr. Edwards, that children need to have fun in sport. They need to learn multiple skills to have a longevity of a career in sport. So that's a very, very wise answer to those questions. The next question, and I will translate it, well, it's been translated for me into English. A very good question, and it's one that I know you and I have both faced in our clinical practice. What do you do when the coach himself or herself is the one that's actually boycotting the athlete or causing the problem? There's $1 million question for you, Dr. Edwards. I look forward to your response.
It's an excellent question, and it's a pervasive problem among all sports, among all levels, and it's a problem that I think is going to take many years to fix. I see many organizations starting to create avenues to address this issue. I know that many countries have had, investigations and reports about how to do this. But as we know in the sport world, it's not always easy, and oftentimes people are protected. I really think what's important is that sport organizations have separate avenues where people can report concerns, access supports, and get some objectivity. I think we would all recognize that within an organization it would be difficult to get some of that objectivity to protect these athletes. So I think that is very, very important. So, but I know that that's not always there in youth sports, and I hear about this a lot in youth sports. I think you have to understand the structure of the sport, and sometimes you have to go beyond the coach, and it's not always easy and it's not always fun because you worry about the repercussions on your athlete or your child, but it's not usually yours alone. So I would encourage you to find out how big a problem this is with other parents or other athletes, and figure out which other avenues you can follow to find support in these elements. In our country, we have other regulatory bodies kind of up the line in various sports, in local and then provincial and then national sport organizations. So there are many different avenues. And if it is a minor, and if you're worried about abuse or maltreatment, sometimes in some countries you can also get children's services involved. So I think it's about educating yourself about what's available in your community and within that sport organization, identifying other potential avenues where you can make complaints or express your concerns. But I would encourage, any organization, any country to have an external body that concerns can be brought to, certainly to have some objectivity and safety.
Great, thank you. I have two questions regarding parents who are coaches. So I'm going to combine the two. And the first is, what do you think about it? And the second part of that question is, what do you do if that coach then prioritizes their son or daughter? I'm not sure that's really related to mental health as coaching ethics, but perhaps I'll let you take a little stab at that.
Again, this is a pervasive issue in all sports at all levels. And we see it more in youth sports, I think, but I also see it at the national team level in a variety of other sports where parents can kind of stay involved along the way. I see it create problems in fair play, and I see it create problems in their own athletes' development, because the athlete doesn't actually develop a great understanding of boundaries, of where coach ends and parent begins, and sometimes that can get blurred. And in fact, that is one of the top 5 reasons that kids actually leave sport by the age of 15, is when those boundaries aren't quite there. Again, I would hope that within an organization, there would be an opportunity to raise concerns either to the convener of the organization, I'm thinking for minor sports, or at some point as the athlete ages, if they become a young adult and their parent is still coaching them and it can still be obstructive or challenging, there would have to be a clear conversation with those adults that ongoing relationship may actually impair that athlete's ability to move forward. At some point, there needs to be a change. And I have these conversations a lot, but I see it in all sports. It's not an easy thing to navigate, and there is a lot of injustice certainly in sport. I would echo Margot. It's coaching ethics would come into that. So there are lots of coaching organizations perhaps that may be available to field that challenge when it occurs, or again within that organization to raise those concerns.
Super. Thanks, Dr. Edwards. I have one that I see a lot, and I've worked with Olympians, and when I describe the anxiety that they feel, the Olympians look at me and say, well, that's just my normal life. So how do you differentiate the difference between normal life as an athlete anxiety and an anxiety disorder? And I think in particular, the one question was really asking about anxiety in children. So there's 2 parts to this question, and I've added my little piece on that about the differentiating anxiety, and the other questions about children and their anxiety with performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the risk of creating anxiety disorders in children is really putting them in, if you skip too far along that athlete development pathway, you skip some of those cognitive areas of development, that's when the athletes will be more prone to anxiety disorders. I mean, there are many, many components that lead to anxiety, including, genetic vulnerability and birth issues and things like that, other illnesses. But in general, you need to understand what a child is capable of doing, what you ask of them, and they need to receive the right amount of encouragement and support and positive feedback along the way, or they're just going to jump to feeling too much pressure, too much expectation, and it really takes the fun away. In terms of figuring out, dissecting what is sport-related anxiety versus just overall anxiety, sometimes it's just about the questions that you ask, and it's about, asking the child, what makes you feel anxious, and are you worried about lots of things, and when does that upset tummy hit you? Is it only when you're at the pool or in the gym, or is it all the time? And is there a problem with sleep? So it's really about the questions you ask, trying to sort out when it applies. Some of the same strategies you can use for regular anxiety versus sport-related anxiety. And I certainly do a lot of work with my national team athletes about, progressive muscular relaxation and breathing, visualization and imagery. Those are the very same strategies that I use with younger kids too. Obviously, the wording has changed a little bit to help them understand it, but the strategies are the same along the way. But I think in terms of trying to protect younger children from developing anxiety in the first place, they need to be coached along appropriately. They need to be supported appropriately. And as parents, if you feel that, depending on the pathway that your child is on, you want them to be healthy, number one, and you don't want to subject them to things that are going to be harmful or destructive for them. So keeping that in mind and protecting them along the way is important.
Great. It is a big problem for many athletes, and is very common. So thank you for that question and for your response. I have another question here that's a very important one. Where can coaches and parents find materials or recommendations to support athlete mental health?
Excellent question.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll mention the Athlete 365 and the Athlete on the Olympic.org.
Now, does everyone have access to that documentary?
Oh yeah, it's a simple login.
Okay. Yeah, since COVID especially, there have been a lot of organizations that have made mental health resources for athletes very open and available. The British Journal of Sport Medicine, they have a hub of resources there. The English Institute of Sport, Australia has their own as well. Sweden has their own. The Canadian Olympic Committee has theirs. So most countries have actually developed hubs of their own. So literally, I think if you did a Google search on athlete mental health in your country, you would probably come up with a whole lot of resources. In addition, for just youth mental health, like the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, ACAP, AACAP.org, I believe, always has facts for families, and they have some great resources for just general anxiety in children and mood in children and how to manage that.
Excellent. There are some great resources out there. Thank you. I have another question here, and it's related to what national federations can do to support their athletes who are struggling from the mental health fallout from trauma within sport. I don't mean trauma as in injury. I suspect that means harassment and abuse trauma.
Yes. Yes. And again, I think it's different in every country, and I think not every national federation that has a structure necessarily set up, but there may be like a more national structure that may be available for them. Again, in Canada, we've had a task force that's been working together since the beginning of the pandemic, and we've been able to create a hub of information for things like this for everybody to be able to access. But I'm not sure what other countries would have. But I would suggest navigating through, for example, your national sport organization, so your national Olympic Committee sort of website, and try to navigate through those pathways to see what's there. And if you can't find anything with your own nation, look in other countries because they probably have something as well.
Yes, and I'd just like to point out to everyone that there is a talk tomorrow morning at 10:15 Eastern Time on harassment and abuse in sport, or safe sport as we like to call it. So please, if you have questions related to the mental health sequelae of harassment and abuse in sport, to log in tomorrow morning at 10:15 for that talk as well. I think we have time maybe just for one or two more quick ones. This is a very interesting one as well. When an athlete comes from a low-income environment or poverty, are they more likely to have mental health issues?
Well, we certainly know that there are social determinants of health, and poverty and some of the things that go along with that certainly can make them more vulnerable to that. I know from experience some of the athletes that I treat in the Professional Football League here in Canada, CFL, who have come from many of those backgrounds do end up having mental health challenges because they've had more adversity early in their lives. Mental health outcomes as an adult are often tied to adverse childhood experiences. There are many different types of adverse childhood experiences, including poverty, neglect, domestic violence, incarceration of a parent, trauma, abuse, different things like that. So we know that the more ACEs you have, the higher your ACE score, the higher the vulnerability is that you will have a mental illness. However, I do know that in a lot of those cases, sport is their lifeline, and sport is what gets them out of there and opportunities for life.
Right, that's a great response. We have another question here. Is there a best way to align coaches and parental support to build strong mental health and resilience in age group athletes?
I think the best way is really to have an organizational education session, and I know a lot of our provincial sport organizations have done this, hosted like either a workshop or an hour or two where we do a presentation like this, and everybody's there. The coaches, the parents, the kids are there, so they all hear the same messaging, they all hear the same language, and we work towards a common goal. I think that's the best way to really align it, to demonstrate that the organization is behind that mindset, and let everybody know that this is the framework that we're expecting and that we're using and that we're going forward with. With that, the children have some guardrails to know what's being expected. The parents know that they're being supported, and the coaches know what their accountabilities are. So I think that can really bring together multiple different avenues to make sure they're on the same page.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Edwards. We're nearing the end of our session now, and I would like to close off by reminding everyone that if you have questions that you've posted in the chat that we were not able to get to, that they will be answered in written and posted on the UANA website shortly. So I'd like to thank you for your everyone for listening today, for your engagement, and for, most importantly, for the action that you will take after this talk to improve the opportunities for athlete mental health in your athletes. But most importantly, I'd like to thank Dr. Edwards for taking her time and sharing her expertise with all of us, and thus improving the health and well-being of our athletes around the Americas and the swimming pools. So thank you, Dr. Edwards, on behalf of UANA for your brilliant talk today.
Thank you, everybody.